Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. We are, at the time of this taping, 15 days away from the NFL draft. It is nearly upon us, and we haven't talked about the wide receivers yet, Greg. This is not like the most uber talented class. There's no, Jamar Chase wandering around up at the top of the draft, but there's a lot of fun and functional players that teams are going to do well by this year.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's funny because being at the combine, I spoke to some, coaches, and there's a sense that there's not that, alpha dog in this class. Although you and I both know that once we get down the road 2-3 years, a couple of guys will turn out to be those kinds of players. But I think there's a sense, just as you said, that there's not a Jamar Chase. There's not that guy that everybody knows is that guy. Because I remember watching Jamar Chase the summer of his last year at LSU, because obviously then he sat out that last year due to COVID. And I remember watching him that summer and saying to myself, this guy's special, because I watched a lot of him. And, I thought that he had attributes that reminded me of several players. And I just said, this guy's big time prospect. Right. There are guys I like in this draft, and we can mention certainly a few of them. And maybe one turns out to be a really, really good player. But I don't think, as we sit here today, and as I said, speaking to some coaches at the combine, there's a sense that there's not that guy for sure. And I think, therefore, receivers in this draft will be, as I like to say, in the eye of the beholder. It'll be a function of team, what the team thinks they need based on the other receivers on their team, how they anticipate that player being deployed within the context of their offense. So there'll be a lot of variables that come into play.
Yes, and I think that, just as you said, just because there's not one eye-popping, like definitively special player at the position doesn't mean that the teams going through this in all different shapes, sizes, and skill sets of wide receivers won't be able to find some really good assets in this year's draft. We've been talking about a lot of the top prospects at every position, Greg, and certainly wide receiver is of local interest here for the Tennessee Titans, with how that situation has kind of devolved since A.J. Brown was traded. I'd like to start, though, with, I think the player who a lot of us regard as the top wide receiver in this class, although, again, that may be team dependent. But Jackson Smith-Njigba coming off an injury-plagued year, but with truly special production when we saw him put together the last full season alongside Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, the Ohio State slot receiver. At least he's been a slot receiver at Ohio State, but obviously teams are going to look at him with a lot of different capabilities in a variety of different offensives.
Yeah, I really liked his tape a lot. I watched him actually last summer from 2021 and then was excited to see him this year, and he really didn't play due to injury. Now, he worked almost exclusively out of the slot in 2021. 104 of his 113 targets came out of the slot, Buck, in 2021. But he's almost 6'1". He's not a little slot receiver. He's not one of those guys you look at and say, oh, he's got to play the slot. So he's almost 6'1". He's almost 200 pounds. And I'm not making an apples to apples comparison here, so I don't want people to take it that way. But we had this conversation about Justin Jefferson when he came out of LSU, who was predominantly, almost exclusively a slot receiver in his last year at LSU. And many, including myself, made the mistake of just assuming that, hey, that's what he would have to be in the NFL. And obviously, we know how that turned out. And I don't. That's why I said I don't want this to be apples to apples and have people think, oh, you said Smith-Njigba is Justin Jefferson. I'm not making that point. I'm making the point that because he's not, 5'9" and 175 pounds, that it's very possible he could be seen by teams as both an inside player and an outside player. Because as I said, he's measured at 6 feet and 5/8 and 196 pounds. By the way, his sort of quickness measurables, the short shuttle and the 3-cone, were just ridiculously off the charts. This guy can separate with the best of them. The term that I use is he's a separation generator. This guy has unbelievable short area quickness to separate on routes. He's so smooth. He makes it look so easy. The one thing he lacks, which is not absolutely necessary, is he's not a vertical explosion guy. He's not necessarily going to beat you over the top can he on occasion? Sure, everybody can on occasion, but he's not, you wouldn't call him a vertical dimension. But this guy can separate, and he is fun to watch.
Well, the separation element, Greg, to me, I would seem so much more. I mean, all elements of these things are important in the application of how the players use them in their respective games. But like the ability to consistently generate separation
Yes.
generator, as you just mentioned, as somebody who's watched a lot of wide receivers in the last year that aren't capable of generating separation, I know how critical that can be, and so many other NFL teams and fan bases understand
Look,
that
I
is
think,
so much more important than just the straight line speed.
I'm not going to take credit for what I'm about to say, although I knew it. But then I had a chance both at the Super Bowl and at the Combine to spend time with TJ Hushmanzada. And I don't know if you've ever had a chance to talk with him. And he works out receivers. He trains them. And he was a really good receiver in his own right in the league, and he wasn't, a vertically explosive guy. So he had to be a guy that got open. Okay. And people may remember the years with Carson Palmer and Chad Johnson. That's when he played. That's when he had his best years. And he talked about three things to me, which, as I said, I knew them, but the way he said it, it really clarified it. He said receivers have to be able to get off press. They've got to separate. And he said something really interesting. They've got to be able to stop. And I thought that was fascinating. And Smith-Njigba can do all of this. And he can do all of this at a pretty high level. And even at the combine, and I was fortunate enough to be on the field, just watching his quickness on this routes that required it, when they did all the drills, he just moves a little bit differently in that short area. And again, I don't know where he's going to get drafted, but I think he can play outside as well as in the slot.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the belief of a lot of NFL teams who are looking to add a talented wide receiver to their offense. Greg, Jordan Addison is somebody who I find interesting just because he was a dominant player at Pitt
Yeah.
in his not this past season but the season prior. Transfers to USC, obviously, before the end of the season where Caleb Williams started he was a little banged up and they were having difficulties moving the ball. Jordan Addison was still an asset for them, but not quite regarded as one of the best wide receivers in this class. He's still got a lot of talent, a lot of ability, and a lot of refinement, it looks like, when you watch him.
Yeah, I would say that's fair. The thing with him is he weighed 173 at the combine.
Right.
So he's a smaller receiver. He is 5'11", but 173. And you see it on tape that he's pretty thin. He's thin framed. But you're dealing again with a guy that's really smooth, really fluid. You would not say that he's a vertical receiver in a strict sense, but he can get vertical. And I do believe he played bigger than his size based on tape. He didn't make tough contested catches that demanded, concentration, body control, good hands. He did all that. I think he knows how to use his vertical stem to attack and break down corners. And in some ways, he was similar to Smith-Njigba in that he could separate at the top of his route stem. I think he can run routes at all three levels. I think he does have enough vertical ability to do that. So, he can be a multi-dimensional weapon, Buck, in the context of a passing game. I think he can work at all three levels. I think he has inside-outside versatility. So he's a good prospect as well.
Yeah, there's a couple of these guys, Greg, who I look at and say, man, they just make the game look so, I don't want to say easy, but the way that they're able to apply their skill set to their respective games. Zay Flowers is one that comes to mind in particular. And you and I touched on him a little bit because I think we were both surprised to not see him at the Senior Bowl, given where he ended up playing in the collegiate bowl games afterwards, and to see the way that to go back and watch Boston College and that offense in particular, where there's not a lot of wide open spaces for him to be running in, but in particularly his production in the red zone was the thing that really made him pop to me.
Yeah, and actually his numbers would have been significantly better with better quarterback play. He got on top of the coverage several times in both 2021 and 2022, and balls were just thrown really badly that would have been explosive plays and or touchdowns. So his numbers would have been significantly better. Zay Flowers, and again, you know how I do this. When I say a guy's one of my favorite guys, it's based on tape. And I watched him, believe it or not, because I kept thinking he was going to come out. So I watched his 2020 tape back a couple of years ago. I watched his 2021 tape last summer. And then, of course, this year I watched his 2022 tape. So I've seen a lot of Zay Flowers. And I really, really like Zay Flowers. He's one of my favorite guys in this draft at the receiver position. And I think another guy can line up anywhere. He clearly has vertical ability. He can run by people. And he fits today's NFL because he's a guy that can be a jet sweep guy. You can run screens to him. You want the ball in his hands. He's really good at run after catch. He's really good in space. But make no mistake, this guy can get on top of the defense. You know, he ran a route, the corner post, which he was open seemingly all the time. That's a vertical route, obviously. And you know, it reminded me of 3, 4, 5 years ago watching Tyler Lockett in Seattle. He ran a ton of corner posts when Russell Wilson was the quarterback, and it seemed like Tyler Lockett was always open. And I really, really like Zay Flowers. And in speaking to a couple of coaches on the field at the combine, NFL coaches who coach wide receivers, you know, they spend time with these guys, you know, obviously throughout the week, as you know. Mm-hmm. They told me that this guy is an absolute alpha dog.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could get a little bit of it, and these guys aren't made available in college the way that they are in the pros, but you go back and try and find some press conferences a little bit before we do the larger media availabilities with them at the combine this time of year, and just kind of getting a sense for him in a limited sample size. That definitely comes through. He's not shy by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly not on the field either.
Yeah, no, he was, like I said, I did him very early in the process. It was actually before the combine, and I really, really liked it.
So mixed reviews for Quentin Johnson. He's obviously a physically imposing player at the position. He can jump out of the gym or whatever cliches athletically you want to use around this guy. But Greg, the combat catch situation for Quentin Johnson, his inability to consistently kind of put it together in big spots. When you look at Max Duggan having 38 touchdowns last season and Quentin Johnson only being responsible for 6 of them, you kind of go back and watch this guy and say, all right, what is this missing? Because it all seems like it should make so much sense. What does the tape show when you watch him in that TCU offense?
Yeah, you got to keep in mind one thing. He was 6'3", 208 at the combine. I don't think he ran as well as people expected, and maybe even he expected, I'm sure. But, you know, he has stride length, and stride length is a trait, as you and I have talked numerous times. I think he's at his best, Buck, as a movement route runner. And by that, I mean the routes where he's on the move, vertical routes, post routes, over routes, shallow and intermediate crossers. I don't think he's a guy that stops really well. You know, I think you want routes where his stride length and his play speed can generate some separation. And I think that's critical for him. So can he be a vertical guy because of that? I think he can. I think he needs to catch the ball better. I think overall he needs to work on his route running because, as I said, I think at this point he's much more of a run away from coverage guy than a guy who has a refined, nuanced feel for route running. I think his size will get people excited. I just don't know if you can look at him right now. I guess what I'm trying to say is with him, you're thinking, what can he be and what can he become 2, 3, 4 years down the road? Can he become that number one? You know, I'm not sure. And in speaking to some teams, they feel the same way. They're not sure either. So I think he's your classic case, as I mentioned when we first started. He's your classic case of eye of the beholder.
Yeah, no, I'm so interested to see, at least just to kind of bring it back local, Greg, what the Titans do here with Kyle Phillips, who was a non-factor because of injury last year, Traylon Burks, who had a couple of promising kind of spurts of production interrupted due to injury, and understanding that the cupboard is definitely bare skill position wise here in Nashville. How Rand Carthon chooses to address this, and whether it's the first round or day 2 or day 3, the way that we talked about a lot of these guys who are going to be productive assets despite not necessarily top end talent for these teams, how they kind of try and find a complementary piece here with what they've got already on the roster. It's one of the biggest questions I think we have now that Jeff Simmons signed.
Yeah. And there's other receivers obviously I liked, and there's one that another SEC receiver that to me I really liked his tape, and even people at the combine that I spoke to, they like him as well as once they started watching him, and that's Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss.
Right.
Now Ole Miss turned out to be a bit of a running football team this year, which might surprise people given that it's Lane Kiffin, but they had the freshman back Junkins, they had Zach Evans who's in this draft, and they did not throw it as much as you might think a Lane Kiffin team would. So the numbers weren't impressive on a sheet of paper. But we're talking about a kid that's 6'2", 220. He ran a 4.46 40. I mean, he's a really intriguing prospect. He can line up anywhere in your formation. Again, this is not an apples to apples comparison, so I hope people don't take it that way. But he did remind me at times a little bit of A.J. Brown, who also came out of Ole Miss. Big kid, could catch the football, could run. I'm sure his 40 time was, better than A.J. Brown's. I don't remember A.J. Brown running a great 40 time, and his game's not really built on speed. But, Mingo ran a 4.46. That's really good. I mean, think about that. He's 6'2", 220.
Right. I mean, that's basically A.J. Brown's size. Like, it was crazy to watch him at the Senior Bowl because I almost had to do a double take. I saw the Ole Miss powder blue helmet. I saw the build of an Ole Miss wide receiver. I'm like, oh wait, no, that's Mingo. I had to like kind of reset myself a little bit there.
So again, I don't think, well, I certainly don't, and I don't have any idea where these guys are going to get drafted. I mean, I think you're going to find that there'll be guys in this draft that, and again, maybe not in the first 10 picks, but when you reach a certain point, I think you're going to see players that you go, oh, wow, I didn't expect that, because I think there's a lot of players in this draft that could be, 18th on one team's board and 49th on another team's board. I think it's that kind of draft once you get by a certain, more core group of players.
Nope, we're getting closer and closer to it. Greg, I just want to wrap up. Jeff Simmons signed his contract today, 4-year extension with this Titans team, $94 million. I mean, we don't need to talk about how great a player Jeff Simmons is, but for defenses in the NFL right now, that interior pressure that he is consistently able to provide, the one-on-one matchups that they create for him to try and win in other ways, how big a premium is the NFL placing on players like Jeff? There's not a ton of players like Jeff, but based on what we're seeing from productive defensive linemen, how important is that skill set right now?
I think it's really important, and particularly for teams because the defensive staff's essentially the same, correct? Mm-hmm. For the most part. I mean, they're going to play a lot of 5 across fronts. I mean, they're going to get Landry back this year, so they're going to play a lot of 5 across fronts. You're going to get one-on-one matchups a lot with Jeffrey Simmons, and Jeffrey Simmons, as we've discussed from the moment he was drafted, because as you recall, I really, really liked him coming out of college. The only reason he fell to where he did was because he had the injury. Otherwise, he would have been a top 10 pick without question. And to be able to just dominate inside one-on-one is absolutely critical in today's NFL. And more teams with those 5-man fronts are creating one-on-one matchups. And, Simmons is really, really dominant in that regard. And I was glad to see that when I saw that, because he's a really, really good football player.
Yeah, no, and he's about the only certain thing about their future that they have on the roster right now, is everything seems to be a bit in flux here in Tennessee. Greg, always appreciate the conversation. Looking forward to getting a little bit closer and certainly getting into a lot more of these prospects over the few remaining weeks that we have.
For sure. Love it, Buck. Thanks.